All right, so let's begin. So we're going to be talking about cellular respiration today. All right, so Anas, what do you know about cellular respiration? Is there anything? Have you heard the term like
Mm.
respiration or cellular respiration, anything like that?
Respiration basically means like reproduction, makes like new or heals.
Okay, kind of. Freya, what have you heard about respiration? Hello, Freya. Sorry, what is it again? Wait, cells make energy, right? So respiration, right, often means like breathing, right? Like breathing in and out, something like that. So it's something to do with oxygen, right? So this is the reason like why we need oxygen, right? Or any animal or any creature needs oxygen. Any organism might need oxygen, is in order to produce energy, right, in the cell, right? So this overall, right, you see this picture over here on the bottom, right? This overall kind of tells you what's going on with respiration, right? So you start with glucose, right? Glucose, remember we were talking about glucose, monosaccharides, all these kinds of things, right? See this hexagonal kind of
Yeah.
structure, right? So glucose and oxygen, right, really produces energy, and the byproducts are carbon dioxide and water, right? So glucose, right? You see this thing right here, C6H12O6. That's glucose. This right here stands for glucose. So what does this mean? C6 means that there's six carbons. So if you look over here on the left, on this picture, right, you're going to see six carbons. You're going to see six C's. You're also going to see 12 H's, right? That's why it says H12, and six oxygens. You see that? So this right here is the same thing as this glucose picture. They just combined it down into this whatever this is, this molecular formula or something. Okay. So this right here, this is glucose. This is sugar. So basically, what we're doing is we're basically burning sugar, right? Right? Because when we're using oxygen, right? Like let's say you have some firewood, right? And then right you burn it, right? What does that mean, Anis? If I say I'm burning some firewood, like what is happening?
You're changing the property of the wood.
Right. So I'm taking the firewood, right? I'm combining with oxygen from the air, right? That's why if you cover a fire, it eventually goes out, right? Because a
Okay,
fire
it
needs
gets no oxygen.
right. So from the air, it's usually getting oxygen. So the fire the fire is consuming oxygen to burn the wood, and when it does that, it releases energy, right? It releases heat, releases light, and so we use that to cook. People use that to stay warm, stuff like that, right? So this is the same kind of idea, except here we're not there's not like a fire. This is basically, you could think of this as this like a very like controlled kind of burn, right? We're burning glucose, the sugar, in a very controlled kind of way, and so therefore we can use the energy, right? So we're burning in a very controlled way, in such a way that we can actually use the energy, right? So otherwise there'd just be like a big fire in every cell, right? Well, so this is like a very controlled kind of burn, right? All right. So this right here, all right. So this picture over here is just telling you that all of these organisms use oxygen. Right. So this is just showing you that all of these organisms are going to use oxygen, right? And grass, humans, amoebas, trees, all living things, right, can use oxygen. Not every single living thing actually uses oxygen. There's some kinds of bacteria and stuff like that that actually don't need oxygen. But most things, most living things, they're going to use oxygen for this purpose in order to make energy. All right. So now we're going to talk about ATP, or we're just going to review a
Sorry,
little bit.
brother.
What's
Assalamu
next?
alaikum.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about ATP, right? It's just like a little bit of a review, right? So we talked about ATP, right? So the idea behind respiration, right? So we're talking about respiration where, sugar and oxygen turns into carbon dioxide and water, right? Um, the idea is that in the end, we're trying to produce ATP. That's the end goal, right? So every glucose molecule is going to turn into a bunch of ATP molecules, and that ATP is something that the cell can actually use to do things around the cell, right? Now, there's two types of respiration, right? What we're going to talk about mostly today is what's called aerobic respiration, right? Freya, what do you think that means? All right, so Freya, make sure that your microphone is on, right? So what does it mean if I say aerobic respiration? What does that mean? So we can, right? Aerobic, right? Yusuf, have you heard the word aerobic before? What does that mean? Aerobic or aerobic respiration?
Brother, it's yes, I've heard of aerobic, brother. It's like involving the breathing of air, brother.
Right. So basically, air like air, right? So it basically involves oxygen, right? So you also have
Yes.
anaerobic respiration, where energy is produced where there's no oxygen that's needed. So we're going to be talking about mostly aerobic respiration, right?
Wait, did I miss anything?
Not much. No, no,
All right.
So we're going to cellular respiration and photosynthesis are kind of like opposite processes, right? So what happens in photosynthesis, right? In photosynthesis, you take in carbon dioxide from the air and you produce oxygen and glucose, right? Sugar, right? The plant produces sugars, right? And it produces oxygen, right? All right, Anas, why do you think cellular respiration is kind of like the opposite of photosynthesis?
Because you need oxygen to do it
Right. So instead of
instead of making it.
Mhm. Exactly. So instead of making it, you're actually using it up, right? What else? What about glucose? How is that kind of the opposite of glucose?
They're making sugars, but you already have sugars and energy.
How about you? So what do you think? Why is respiration the opposite of photosynthesis with relationship to sugar?
With the relationship to sugar, uh, I think because photosynthesis makes sugars, right?
Yep. So photosynthesis makes the sugars.
Mm. And mitochondria they just use up sugars
Right. So in
for the cellular
respiration,
respiration as to burn it.
right, exactly, right. So photosynthesis and respiration are kind of opposites, right? In addition, in respiration, you're releasing energy. You're trying to make energy, right? You're trying to produce energy. In photosynthesis, you're taking the energy from the sun and you're actually consuming it. You're taking it out of the system.
Wait, brother, you're making energy? Oh, like you're
Or you say you're releasing energy.
yeah releasing like
Yeah,
ATP, right?
yeah, exactly, right. So in photosynthesis, you're doing the opposite. You're taking the sun's energy and sort of capturing it and turning it into, you're like sticking it into the glucose molecule, right? So in all of these ways, right, these two things are kind of like opposites, right? In photosynthesis, you're kind of like storing the energy, and in respiration, releasing it to do some kind of work. So basically, everyone here is like sort of you can think of it as like kind of like solar powered, right? Because this energy came from the sun, right? The sun's light, just from the sun's light. That's how the plants are making food, right? And eventually, you eat the food and then release that energy that was stored from the sun, right? All of you guys are like solar powered, creatures, something like that. All right. So this is just this is just talking about what are the compounds that are being used, right? So glucose, right? So we see this hexagon. Remember this monosaccharide picture, right? With the hexagon. This is glucose, and then oxygen, right, is O2. So oxygen usually doesn't exist just by itself, like like one oxygen atom. Usually, what's floating around in the air is mostly O2, two oxygen atoms put together, right? So these are the things that are going to be used in respiration, right? Now, some things that are going to be produced and consumed in respiration, right? So let's talk about these two molecules, right? So there's these things called NAD and FAD. So what are these? These are basically electron carriers, right? Kind of like a battery, right? So this picture down here is kind of illustrating for you kind of like what these things are, right? All right. So in some of the steps, we're going to talk about where this happens more specifically like later on, just to understand the idea right now, right? So you see over here, right? at the top you have kind of this empty battery, right? It says NAD plus. Now, if you add electrons to it, it kind of becomes sort of a charged battery, NADH, right? Down here. So NAD plus is floating around in the cell, and in one part of respiration, it kind of gets charged up. Electrons get put into it, and it gets charged up, and it turns into NADH. So then the NADH is sent later on somewhere else to do some work, and we're going to find out what work that does. But this is the main idea, right? Is that these things, NAD, and also same thing for FAD. FAD is the same idea. NAD and FAD, they're kind of like uncharged batteries. At certain steps, they're going to be charged. Electrons are going to be given to them. They're going to be charged up to form FADH, 2, and NADH. All right, and then those two things, they go somewhere else to do some work. And we're going to talk about what work that does, right? So that's all you need to know for right now about these things, this cycle, right? NADH, the one with the H, those are the charged ones that can do work. NAD plus or FAD plus, those are basically kind of like uncharged batteries, right? Carbon dioxide and water, right? These things are going to be produced, right? So CO2, right? Carbon in the middle, 2 oxygens, right? And then H2O, we've looked at the structure of H2O. So this is just like a little review what these things look like. So these things are basically produced. So the opposite of photosynthesis, right? And again, ATP and ADP. So in the end, we want to produce ATP. All right, so this is just a review from last time, right? ADP is usually floating around in the cell, and then you add a phosphate group, and it turns into ATP, and that's what we want. All right, so let's kind of look at this picture here. So I think the best way to understand these things is to kind of look at like a lot of different kinds of pictures, because every picture, you kind of gain a little bit of different understanding from it, all right? So in this case, right, Fariha, so cellular respiration has 3 parts.
Brother,
Mm-hmm.
brother. Wait, hold up. ATP is made of adenine and what else? I know there's 3 phosphates,
right.
but what was the other thing?
The ribose sugar.
Ribose. All right.
Right. Remember that the pentagon kind of thing. Okay. All right. So Fariha, so respiration has 3 parts. Can you tell me from this diagram what are the 3 different parts of respiration that we're going to be talking about? And water, right? Anas, what do you think are the 3 different parts of cellular respiration? Based on this picture. Anas, is Anas there?
I think he is, brother. Anas.
All right,
Can't
Yusuf,
hear you.
All right, Yusuf, what do you
Can't hear
think? What are the 3 different parts of cellular respiration from this?
The 3 different parts of cellular respiration. The Krebs cycle. Oh wait, cellular respiration, brother.
Based on this picture.
Okay, it creates H2O. So, okay, so fermentation, brother, glycolysis, and the Krebs cycle, I believe, brother.
Pretty close, right? So fermentation is actually not part of cellular respiration. So this is showing you like an alternative pathway. We're going to talk about this at the very end. So here are the 3 parts. Glycolysis. You see this glycolysis as part number 1. Then it moves to the Krebs cycle, part number 2.
But brother, how does that have to anything? Okay, O2. It produces O2, right?
So oxygen is going to be consumed here. You see oxygen is going into the system here,
Oh.
right?
So then how is this part of cellular respiration? Oh, wait.
Right.
Cellular respiration, brother.
Right,
Sorry.
respiration,
So we're consuming oxygen.
Right.
So then the point of this is to create ATP, right?
Is to create ATP. This is the end goal, is to create all these ATPs down here.
Oh, all right. So then I know what it is, brother.
Mhm.
Glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electrons transport chain, brother.
Correct, right? So glycolysis outside, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain. All right. So Fariha, which 2 of those do you think occur in the mitochondria? Right. So these 2 things, right? Krebs cycle and electron transport chain, they're going to be in the mitochondria. The glycolysis is going to be outside. That's going to happen outside in the cytosol, the cytoplasm, right? Just floating around in the cell, right? So, all right. So, let's see. Okay. So we're going to talk about what are the different stages of respiration, right? So we have glycolysis right outside, you have the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain in the mitochondria, right? So these are all different places. So outside, what's going to happen basically is that glucose is going to be broken down into these things called pyruvate.
What are those
So
pyruvates?
we're going to talk about it later, but this is like right now, just glucose into two pyruvates. Now the pyruvate is going to go here into the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle, right? And in this, it's going to go around and around and produce these charged batteries. Remember we were talking about these charged batteries,
Yeah.
NADH and FADH2. And remember out here again,
But
also,
NADH has already been produced over here.
right. So both places produce it,
Oh, okay, okay.
right? So both places are producing these batteries,
Yeah.
and those batteries go over here to the last step. And at this last step, they help to make a whole bunch of ATP. So ATP is being produced in all three places.
Wait,
But
so
the last one is the place where the most ATP is produced.
this is in mitochondria. All of this is occurring in mitochondria,
Right. these
except
la-
for the cytoplasm part, the
Correct.
glycolysis. Brother.
Correct. Yep.
So
That-
okay,
that's
so then
that's
what
why
does
it's
this thing do?
called, which thing?
The NADH and FADH2. How does it like help?
Yes. We're going to talk about. I'm just giving the basic idea. I want to have a basic picture first, and then we're going to zoom into the details. Right. So also one thing to remember is that oxygen is only consumed in the last step. Okay. So the oxygen is not consumed in glycolysis or the Krebs cycle. It's consumed in the very last step, electron transport chain. Right. So again, we're going to go into more details now. Right. All right. So let's talk about glycolysis first. Right. So in glycolysis, first of all, let's take a look at some pictures to kind of get. So I think the idea is if you look at different pictures, they emphasize different things. You gain different understanding from it. Right. So you have glucose at the beginning. Right. All of this is happening in the cytoplasm. So glucose from the left, right, gets broken down into two pyruvates. Right. So you notice in the beginning, glucose has 6 carbons. You count the C's, they have 6 carbons. And pyruvate, right, Anas, how many carbons does pyruvate have?
Let's see. There's three C's, so
Three.
I'm guessing 3 on each pyruvate.
Correct, right? So you have 3 times 2. So each one glucose produces 2 pyruvates. See that? Because 3 carbons. In addition, you can see it's going to produce 2 of these charged batteries, NADH. 2 of these charged batteries, NADH. And 2 ATPs. In this process, 2 ATPs and 2 of these charged batteries, NADH, are going to be produced. Right?
So then, brother, so then how did it get NAD plus? Like I don't get it. Like what's the difference?
So NADH eventually is going to do work, and it's going to be turned back into NAD plus somewhere else. And so now
So
this thing is floating around. And now it's going to come back, turn into NAD. So it's in a cycle, just like ADP and ATP going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
And it also said that it showed ADP plus another phosphate, so it created ATP, the glycolysis.
So what was the question?
Like go back. So you see that 2 ADP plus P, so it's gonna produce 2 ATP.
Correct, right. So two ATPs are produced in this step also.
Oh yeah. We talked about this last lesson too, right?
So both of these things, ATP and NADH, are both produced here.
I couldn't join last class because I kept disconnecting, maybe because of my Wi-Fi.
Okay. Okay. I think I put the lecture up so you can watch the lecture. But so ATP is basically like the energy producing molecule. Molecule. Right.
Yeah.
Now this one is a little bit more in detail, right? So it's a little bit more complicated, right? So we said that it produces 2 ATPs, right? Overall, this process of a glycolysis from glucose going to these pyruvates at the end over here are going to produce 2 ATPs, okay? But it's a little bit more complicated than that. Can anyone take a look at this picture and tell me why is it more complicated? What is it? What's more complicated here?
Like the way they sorted it out. Like
So
All right, brother. In the start, it has 2 ATP from the glucose, and then it converts that into 2 ADP to create more energy. Is that what's happening? Like in the start, you see that?
That's the key step, right? So what's happening here in the beginning? Are we
Yeah.
are we making ATP here, or are we
No,
using
no,
it up?
no. We're like producing energy from ATP.
We're using it up, right?
Oh yeah, we're using the
We're
ATP up.
using it up. Now go back later on. What's going on over here?
We're producing even more ATP now. We have 4 ATP
Four,
towards the
right?
end. Yeah.
So we produce 4 at the end, but we have to take away 2 at the beginning. So 4
Uh,
minus 2 equals overall.
2.
You're making 2. You
Yeah,
understand what I'm saying? Right.
yeah.
So in the end, you're making 4, but you had to use up 2 in the beginning. That's why
Uh-huh.
overall you're making 2 ATPs. That's the idea here.
So then what's happening after that? So you use 2 ADP, right?
Mhm.
And then there's two things that happen. You get NAD plus, right? Or like you create 2 pyruvic acids, right?
Right.
So we get like, so what's going on over here? What are they showing? I'm confused, brother.
So here's what they're showing. They're showing glucose. Okay,
Mhm.
glucose is being broken down into
Uh-huh.
2 pyruvates. All right, now
Uh-huh.
pyruvate is going to be used later on, right? When it's not the end.
Uh-huh.
That's what's happening. So pyruvate is going to go somewhere else and do other things. In addition, it's showing that we're producing these charged batteries, NADH, and overall we're producing 2 ATPs.
So how are we producing those? By adding a phosphate group to the ADP?
So here's the idea. So these bonds, right?
Uh-huh.
These different kinds of bonds, right? So bonds are like rubber bands. That's the idea.
Yeah.
It's like
Uh-huh.
how did we create glucose molecules? Is that energy from the sun
Mhm.
took some carbon dioxide and forced it into this position. It's like this. So think about it. So all these different chemical bonds, right? When they break,
Uh-huh.
they release energy.
Uh-huh.
All these bonds are kind of like a bunch of rubber bands that are
Uh-huh.
stretched or something. So
Uh-huh.
when you cut them, right? So you have to put energy into like if I have a rubber band, right, that I want
Uh-huh.
to do some work. In the beginning, I had to put some work in, right?
Oh.
Right. So where does that
Yeah.
come from? That comes from the sun,
Uh-huh.
eventually, in the beginning. Now,
Mhm.
in this place, it's like imagine that stored energy in all these rubber bands is now being cut one at a time,
Mhm.
and so that stored energy is being released to do some kind of work, like to make it to charge a battery or
Uh-huh.
to make ATP or whatever.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of the idea. I think I would say right now that's probably the way to kind of understand it because you're thinking like okay, well this is like there's 6 carbons put together. Why is it how are we charging a battery with it? It's
Uh-huh.
because each of these bonds has stored energy in it that came from the sun.
Mhm.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay,
So the glucose has energy in it that came from the sun basically, and
that
that
came from the sun.
we use
Correct.
the ATP, we turn that into ADP, and then we have 3 carbon chains, right? Right, like 3 3 over
Right.
here,
Three.
right?
Right. So now it's 3 and 3.
So then we have 1 phosphate. So that means this is and then we have 1 phosphate on each, and then we take 1 phosphate off of it.
Right.
So like it originally had 2, right? Because
Correct.
it's ADP.
Correct. It had 2, and those phosphates now went to produce ATP. Right. Because if you
Uh,
put a phosphate on the ADP, it turns into ATP.
huh. So those phosphates were taken off, so it produces NADH and it also produces ATPs. Basically, what's happening.
Correct. Hmm.
All right, I see.
All right. Now this is another view is kind of showing the same kind of thing. I'm just putting different pictures because like the more you look at the different kinds of pictures, the more you understand it, right? So this is kind of showing the same thing in the beginning, right? We had the 6 carbons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we consume 2 ATPs, right? We use up 2 ATPs.
And those main 2 ATPs come from the sun, right?
No, they just come from before, just from being produced somewhere else. I mean, I guess you can
Okay.
say, from the long, eventually they came from the sun, but right. So you use 2 ATPs in the beginning, that causes this glucose to split apart into 2 things,
Okay.
right? So you have 3 carbon now, right? So now you add another phosphate group, and
So
that's
now you
used
have 3
wait,
carbons and 2 phosphate groups.
on each, right? And then
Wait. So brother, where did
now
that random phosphate come in from? Like
uh,
I don't understand where this.
You added it.
so there's other enzymes and things that are bringing these things in. There's like different things called kinases. So we're not
Uh,
going into that much detail, but there's different things called kinases that attach phosphate groups to things.
oh, all right. So
Right.
so they brought in these phosphates
Yeah,
because it doesn't make any sense where they
right,
get
right.
these
Yes.
phosphates.
So there's other proteins that are interacting with this thing.
Oh, all
So,
right,
so
all right.
it's not just it's not really just this thing. There's other enzymes that are making
Yeah,
these
since
things
it's
do these
outside the
things.
mitochondria, right? So
Right,
they're interacting in this thing.
right. Now down
So
here,
then
right,
he's
down here,
attached. All right.
NAD is being charged into this charged battery, NADH,
Mm.
and ATP is also being produced here.
All right, but how is ATP being produced?
So remember these phosphate groups over here, right?
Yeah, but there's only two phosphates. So where another
Right.
third phosphate came in?
No. So there's two here. That's why
Uh,
you're making two ATPs.
yeah, two ADPs, right?
Right. Two
But
AD.
but do you
Right.
need three phosphate groups to make
No.
one ATP?
No. So ADP already has two. Remember that
Exactly.
diphosphate. So you'll need one
Yeah.
more to make three.
Yeah, but like, where's the third one coming in from?
It's coming from right here. You see these P's? The P.
Where?
The
Do
P stands for
do you see?
Yeah,
phosphate
but
group.
oh, right. Okay, so okay, I see what's going on now. All right, I was okay, I
Right.
get it
Yeah.
now.
So these phosphate groups, that's where we're getting
Oh,
the phosphate to complete the ATP.
I was thinking for a second that these were ADP, but then I just realized that there's no adenine or ribose here, so it's not.
Right.
Okay, I see, brother.
So now we have pyruvate. So at the end, pyruvate is being produced. This is the end goal right here, right now, pyruvate, right? Some of these charged batteries are being produced, but pyruvate is the most important thing that's being produced here. All right. All right. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Krebs cycle. All right. So now we're moving into the mitochondria. So this circle is called the Krebs cycle. It's called cycle because it's going back and forth, right? So you notice at the top, you have the pyruvic acid, right? The pyruvate from before, it's shown up, right? Now, here, you can see that one carbon dioxide is being released. You see one of those green carbons? We're tracking the carbons. One carbon dioxide goes away. So that's one place. So this is where the carbon dioxide is being produced. When you breathe out, right? You breathe out carbon dioxide. This is where it's being produced, right? And in addition, you can see that throughout this process, a whole lot of NADHs are being produced, right? You see all this NADH all over the place, right? So we're charging a lot of these batteries up all over the place here, right? So then this thing goes through this cycle, right? You have two carbons left. It's called acetyl-CoA. And then it starts going through this cycle. And throughout this cycle, energy is being released, right? Energy is being released and is used to charge all of these little batteries, NADH2. So that's the idea behind the Krebs cycle, is that in the Krebs cycle, we're trying to charge up all these batteries. We're trying to take the energy from these molecules and we're trying to charge up the NAD into NADHs. We're trying to charge.
Brother, so what's like the yield? What's like the gain? You know what I'm saying? Like how
so-
many NADH do they make? Is
So
there like
right
any?
now it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each cycle it's going to produce 5, I think.
Each cycle produces 5. All right.
All right. You see there's 5 of these oranges, right?
Yeah.
Right. So 5 of those.
Uh-huh.
And
5 of those each.
right. So
So
now these 5, that's for
Mhm.
one pyruvate molecule, right? Remember, there's 2 of these coming in.
One
so
pyruvic
in total
acid,
there will
right?
be 10
Basically-
NDH.
No.
Yeah,
One
there'll be 10.
pyruvic acid, right? So that means there's 3, right? Okay, yeah.
3
So there'll be
carbons.
2 ATP. That's why there's 2
There's-
ATP at the end, right? And
Correct.
10 NDA. Okay, I see.
Correct, right? Exactly, right? Because from glucose, there's 2 of these things coming in.
Mhm.
So from one glucose, you got to double the amount of
Oh.
NADs and ATPs
Wait.
that are being produced here.
Yeah, so we get
Wait,
10,
wait.
10 NADH at the end. Yeah, I see.
Right.
Can you explain it from the beginning? So we have the pyruvic acid going in,
Right.
and then I see carbon dioxide.
Coming out. So you see now, you see there's only 2 more carbons left.
Oh
over here,
yeah,
right? Right.
2 carbons, which is gonna be the NDH.
No. So NADH is up here, separate.
Brother, so what is NADH2? Look, it says FAD turns into NADH2. Does that mean there's 2
I think that should be FADH2.
FADH2?
Yeah,
All right.
'cause
So what's the
FAD
difference
is-
between
so-
NADH and FADH are the same thing,
Yeah.
but they just have a slight difference?
There's a slight difference in the structure. I don't know what exactly is the difference, but it's like it's the same
I-
idea.
yeah, it has
but
2
the-
hydrogen molecules, right? Because that says 2 by the thing.
I'm not sure. I guess we can look it up. Like, what is the molecular structure of it?
Oh,
But
yeah.
this is basically it
Alright.
does the purpose is kind of the same.
all right.
Like
I
maybe
see,
one
okay.
is more efficient than the other at something or something
Oh,
like that. But it's
yeah.
the same kind of idea. Right?
So we produce 2 ATP and 10 NADH or 10 batteries. brother.
Right. So now from the previous cycle, there's this 4 carbon thing coming up, right? See these 4 carbons right here, oxaloacetate, right? There's 4 of those. So this 2 that's coming in here joins with it to form a new 6 carbon molecule called citric acid. You guys see that? So the 2 and the 4 join
Okay.
together to form 6 carbons. Okay. Now as it's going through, you see it loses 2 carbons to carbon dioxide. You see these 2 carbons here in the middle? Right. So
Yes.
eventually it ends up with 4 again. So it ends up with 4. It can join with the 2 coming in again and it forms 6.
Mm.
You guys see that, right?
Yeah.
So throughout the cycle, more carbon dioxide. This is where all the carbon dioxide is being produced here in the Krebs cycle. Okay. So the purpose of this is to charge up all these batteries, right? Produce a little bit of ATP,
So all this carbon dioxide is released, right?
and a lot of carbon dioxide is released here. All right. All right. Let me see if. Okay, I think we basically talked about most of it. Okay, yeah, so I think we talked about all this stuff. So the things that they're mentioning here are pyruvic acid turns into acetyl-CoA here, right? Combines with oxaloacetate to form citric acid. So I think the rest of these names you don't need to know, but
What is the
So we don't need to know all
acetyl?
this oxaloacetate and stuff. We don't
so
need to
so
know all this.
so this is I'm not sure if they're going to ask you. I would know these 4 names right here.
Uh-huh. So
Right.
basically, what's
Pyruvic
happening is the
acid,
pyruvic acid,
axle.
right? It breaks off one carbon dioxide,
hmm
so which goes away, and then you get one NADH, and then that turns into acetyl CoA, whatever, because
Right.
there's only 2
Right,
things.
acetyl
Right? This is the
CoA.
same thing as pyruvic acid, but it just has one less CO2,
Right,
right?
right. This has one less
Okay.
carbon because it lost the carbon dioxide.
So then the acetyl loses its COA. What does that
No,
mean?
okay.
Brother?
So you see this arrow going down here?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the acetyl-CoA joins with this oxaloacetate to form this 6 carbon ring.
So then why is that CoA going away?
Okay, hold on a second. So I don't remember what CoA is. That's called coenzyme A or something like that. It's like a
No.
part that breaks off.
Or it breaks
goes
off
off.
so it could join with the oxaloacetate.
Right.
Oh, okay, because these are 4,
Right,
so
you see
you
this
join
is
because
4?
basically, all right,
This is
it
2.
creates 6, right?
So they join
6
to make
carbon.
6. Right.
Mhm.
Now,
6
eventually-
citric
now-
acid.
You see in the next step, it loses a carbon dioxide and it turns into 5. You see that? See how it's
Okay, then 4, then 3, then 2,
Exactly.
then 1,
Then it
like
goes down
that.
here, loses another carbon. So now it's only 4 left.
Mm.
And so that 4 keeps going up and joins with another 2 acetyl-CoA that comes up.
So then where did the ATP coming from, brother? Why does it randomly just keep making ATP?
Let me see. So ATP. So I mean, like I don't know, like I think that's something like why is that happening? So there's like stored energy in bonds, right? But
Uh-huh.
like to visualize it, that's like something difficult to kind of see.
All right.
You have to talk to like I don't know who would even study that. I don't know if it was like physical chemistry or something. Somebody would study that.
All right, brother. I don't
Like
care
they
about
make
going
these,
that
they
deep,
make,
brother.
they make
That's like
these
2 deep.
computer models to try to understand like how these things work.
So, like, do we know if like this is all real, brother?
So
or
what
they
type of
just make this up,
microscope
brother?
would they use?
Wait. I have a question, brother. Did they actually see all of this happening?
I'm not sure. I don't think they see. So it's all based on like clues, right? So they have theories and they kind of put it all together as to how all this stuff works. So I don't think anyone like sees like this ATP joining. It's just like they see the before and they see the after.
Like they know the Krebs cycle and stuff exists.
Right. You see like before and after, and then you guess kind of what happens. That's kind of so.
Oh, all right.
And they have different theories, So all this is like very complicated. This is just like the basics, right?
All right,
If you
man.
want to say like, how do we know exactly? That's like you can study that for years.
Yeah, I'm good, brother. I'm good.
Right. So again, this is the same thing. I'm just showing you a different picture, right? Right. Oh, you see a whole bunch of NADHs are produced. Carbon dioxide is produced, right? FADH2 is produced here. Yeah, so I think the NADH2 on the other one was wrong, right? It's FADH2 that's produced here. All right? And they're giving you some additional names. These are all the different names of the different things, right?
It also shows us the ATP is formed, brother.
Yeah, ATP is formed also. All right? This is another thing. It's the same thing. I'll just skip this one. This is the same kind of thing. All right, this is the same thing again. I'm showing you like different pictures. All right. So here, same thing again, right? It just shows you the carbons, like where they're lost, right? So you can see that the carbon dioxides are coming off. They're losing one of those C's. One C is going off. And a whole lot of NADH and FADH2 is being produced. All right. So now let's go to the electron transport chain. All right. I don't think this picture is like the best. Let's see. All right, let's go to this picture first. All right. So notice over here, right? You remember all those charged batteries? This is where they all come in useful. This is the last step, electron transport chain. You notice you notice this green circle, right? All right, Freeha, what's going on in this green circle? It says NADH, NAD plus. What's going on over here? Right. So they're losing. Okay, good. So they're losing electrons. Okay. So Yusuf, what's being done here within the green? What's the purpose here?
What happened, brother? What's the purpose for the NADH losing its electrons?
Right. What is it trying to accomplish here?
Brother, this is like a circuit, brother. It's like trying to go to the NAD plus, but then it's tricked, and then it takes the electrons into this thing.
Right. Right. Good. So kind of right. So this right here, right? This is where the battery is being used, right? Now these batteries, right? FADH2 and NADH are being used to basically power these proteins that are basically pumping. You see all these hydrogen ions, H plus, H plus. They're all being pumped across into this space right over here. Right? They're just like right. That's the purpose. Where remember all those NADHs that were being produced. All that energy is being stored. This is where it finally comes in handy. All this battery is being used to pump all of this hydrogen ion into this space up here. That's the purpose of this.
So what's the point of pumping these things
Very
up
good.
here?
So once you pump all this up here, what is the purpose? It goes over here in the red, and it comes down.
It comes down, which produces energy, brother.
Correct. It comes down through this protein right over here. When it comes down here, just like water flowing down a water wheel turns and does some work, all these hydrogens rushing back through. Okay, they're gonna spin this thing. You see this like little circle going across, right? They're gonna be spinning this protein, and that protein is gonna because of that spinning, is gonna take ADP and phosphorus and join them together to make a whole bunch of ATPs.
ATP synthase, brother.
This is basically like the main goal of respiration is to produce.
Okay, so these electrons, right? This is like a mini circuit, brother, right? So this electron is like going for ground, all right? And when it reaches here, right, brother, it turns O2 with so it turns so half of O2, I don't know what that means. Half of O2 plus 2 hydrogen to make H2O. How is that doing?
Right. So in this case, right? So it's not really half of oxygen. Here's what it means. You have one oxygen plus 4 hydrogens is going to produce 2 water molecules.
4 hydrogens, brother? Where did the 4 hydrogens come?
So here's why. This equation, they made
There's
this equation.
hydrogen.
Right, guys, so they made this equation such that it produces 1 water molecule. Okay, but in reality, right? So, but it's not really that half an oxygen molecule is being used. That's not. Really what's happening.
one. It's monoxide, right?
Yeah,
1 oxygen.
1 of these plus 4 of these.
How is it 4? It's just 2H.
Okay,
So that means it's 2, right?
But I'm saying in the end, it's going to produce 2 waters. I'm doubling all of these numbers, so that we don't have a fraction.
I'm confused with it.
They put it as a fraction.
So
they put it as a fraction.
Hold up.
They put it as a fraction just because they're trying to show what leads to 1 water molecule.
Yeah, but look, it says 2H plus, right? So that still means 2 hydrogen molecules, right?
Right, but I'm saying, what if you double all these numbers? What if this is 1, 4, 2? It's the same thing.
How is that the same thing, brother?
Right. Well, it's like a recipe, right? If you double all of the numbers in your recipe, you're going to produce twice as much stuff, right? But the proportions are the same.
Yeah. Exactly, but in this case, right, brother, we're still only producing 1 hydrogen, right?
All right. Don't worry about that. All right, we won't worry about all that.
We're still producing 1 water, right, brother?
All right, so let's not worry about this right now. So Yusuf, we can talk about it a little bit later.
All right.
I think that's not that important. The important thing is that here, oxygen is being used up, right? Remember before, in the Krebs cycle, that's where all the carbon dioxide was being produced, right? When we breathe out, we breathe out carbon dioxide, right? That was being produced in the Krebs cycle. The oxygen that we breathe in, that we need it's being consumed right here in the electron transport chain. Okay, does that make sense?
Mm,
So here's the basic idea. Let me just review real quick. So all of these batteries that we charged previously, right? We produce all of this NADH and FADH2. Okay, these batteries are being used here to pump a whole bunch of these hydrogen ions through to the other side. And so you're gonna have like a whole bunch of hydrogen ions up here. They're gonna flow back because if you just store like a whole bunch here, they're gonna naturally flow back, right? You can't just like
yeah.
you can't just like right, especially if you leave this space open here. So they're gonna start flowing through back through this, and just like a
So
water,
the same
just a second,
hydrogen.
just a second. So just like water flowing through a river, can be used to power something to turn a wheel. This is basically like a wheel that's being turned, and it's gonna combine these two things to make a whole bunch of ATP, and that's kind of the end goal of respiration. I answer your question.
So basically, we keep reusing the same hydrogen ion.
Yeah, basically. Yep. So those are
Okay.
being you use energy to pump them through, and then they're gonna flow back. Then you use energy to pump
So
them back
they're
through,
always going to be in the
and they flow
cycle.
back. They're always gonna be in the cycle, correct? All right. So this is like another cartoon kind of picture. It's showing the same kind of thing, right? You see NADH and FADH being used as batteries here to pump,
Mm.
right? Hydrogen ion up here, and then eventually those are going to be, they're going to flow through here to produce ATP.
Hmm.
Right? And this is the same kind of thing. I think the other picture is probably better. All right. All right. So this is the overall idea, right? So we started with sugar. Okay. We use oxygen, which again was used up in the electron transport chain as we just saw. That produces carbon dioxide in the Krebs cycle, plus water, plus energy, right? So all that ATP that was produced was the energy that was produced. Now, whenever you make something, whenever you make have any process, a little bit of heat is always produced. A little bit of that energy, all like 100% of the energy from glucose from the sugar is not put into ATP, right? In any cycle, right? Some energy is wasted as heat. Like if you run a car, right? Like do you get like 100% of the energy out of the gasoline just to power the car?
No.
No, right? It's all inefficiencies, right? That's why the engine gets warm, right? Because some of the energy has
Hmm.
turned into heat. It's basically wasted in a certain sense, right? All right. And so basically, in the end, how much ATP is produced? I think I didn't put the picture up this time, but do you guys remember the picture from last time? From one
Mhm.
molecule of glucose, about how much maximum amount of ATP is produced? Do you guys remember? Freehud
6.
38. Freehud got that one correct, right? So 38, right? So overall, about 38 ATPs are produced, mostly in that very last step, right?
34 are produced in the last step, right, brother?
In the last step, exactly 34, right? So in this last step, this is where most of it is produced, but a little bit it was produced in the other steps too, right? Like 2 each.
So one glucose can make how much ATP?
About 38.
Okay.
All right. All right. So now all that stuff that we just talked about, or almost all of it, had to do with when oxygen is available. Now, what if oxygen is not available? Then we do this thing called anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic. If you take a word and you put an in front of it, it usually means like without or the opposite. Okay.
Mm.
So anaerobic means like the opposite of aerobic, no oxygen or limited oxygen.
So
So
they're probably just using like food
uh,
or
kind of. So here's what happens, right? It goes through a process called fermentation, right? So in fermentation, you can produce two things: lactic acid or alcohol fermentation. All right. So let's take a look at like what's can happen. Let me see if there's a. Okay. Let's take a look at this first. So this kind of shows you. All right. Let's do this one. So this one kind of shows you like how you decide, right? So all of these go through glycolysis. So when you have respiration or fermentation, remember the glycolysis where
mm-hmm.
glucose is turned into pyruvic acid, that always
Yes.
happens. But then you decide, okay, is there oxygen? If there is oxygen, it goes to the right. Respiration and all the stuff that we talked about is produced.
Up to 36 ATP.
Up to 36 plus the 2 from glycolysis, so 38. Right. Now, if there's no oxygen, like let's suppose you're exercising, really fat, really really well, and your breathing can't keep up, right?
Yeah.
Or let's suppose there's certain kinds of creatures like yeast cells, different kinds of bacteria, and they just don't use oxygen. They just don't have the mechanism for oxygen. So no. So then they're going to go into fermentation. All right. So this is glycolysis still occurs in fermentation. Okay. But all that stuff in the mitochondria doesn't happen. You guys understand, right? The first step, glycolysis, happens in fermentation. But those last two steps,
The
Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, those are not going to happen.
So the mitochondria takes a whole different path.
Correct. The mitochondria, that's the whole different path, right? So if you have no oxygen, then you go to fermentation. And there's two types, lactic acid or alcohol, right? So let's take a look at some of the differences, like where do these two things occur, right? So over here in the blue is going to be lactic acid. In the purple is alcohol. So it says here, right? It says here that lactic acid fermentation occurs in lactobacillus species, yeast, and muscle cells. Okay. The alcoholic fermentation occurs in yeast and other microorganisms. So in the human body, right? Let's suppose you're exercising really fast. In the muscle cells, you're going to have lactic acid fermentation, not alcoholic fermentation. Right? So other things have alcoholic fermentation, but in human beings, animals, stuff like that, it's just lactic acid fermentation. That's why your muscles sometimes burn if you're running too fast and stuff like that. Right? So let's see, basically, what happens. See, I forgot which picture was the best.
Wait, so how does this produce ATP? Because the end goal is to produce ATP, right?
Correct. So good question, right? So you are still producing ATP. Remember, glycolysis produces a little bit of ATP.
Yeah, but you only get 2 ATP.
Right,
what are you going to do with that?
Right, exactly. So it's not much, right? That's it.
So then what's the point of producing lactic acid
No. So the point of this is just that if you're exercising so fast that you can't go to respiration, you just got to produce something.
all right,
You
all
understand
right.
what I'm saying?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. So the first part is the same. Glucose goes to pyruvate and a little bit of ATP is produced. Now, if we decide, hey, look, there's no,
oxygen.
there's no oxygen, here's what's going to happen. The pyruvate is just going to turn into lactate. Okay,
all right.
that's it, and we finish. Now, here's why. Why is this happening? Okay, look at this. Remember, in the process, right, we produce some NADH up here, right?
Yes.
Right. So Fariha, why did we produce NADH? What was the purpose of making NADH? Why did we make NADH? We need the energy, right? So Anas, what do we need what did we need these charged batteries for?
We need them to, to push the hydrogen ion.
Exactly, in the electron transport chain, right? Now,
Yes.
if you're doing anaerobic and you have no oxygen, are you going to be going there to the?
No, so
No.
you won't need them.
Exactly, right?
Wait, brother. Why won't you need them though?
Okay, so remember, the only place that NADH and FADH2 was used was in the mitochondria in that last step.
Exactly, and the last
Right.
step produces ATP, which we
Right,
need
but-
for
but-
running.
No, but the point is here, if you have no oxygen, we're not going to be going to that last step, right? You don't have-
Exactly. Why not? Because in the Krebs cycle, there was no part which actually we needed in which we needed oxygen.
so it's not going to go to the Krebs cycle if we're not going to go to the electron transport chain. So it's not going to go to just it's not going to waste all that energy and stuff to go there.
But where in the
Krebs cycle.
electron transport chain do we need oxygen? Is my point.
Remember the circled part? You see in the red? It says oxygen. You see oxygen. You see these electrons. they eventually have to flow and make them to oxygen. Oxygen is called it's called electron acceptor or something like that.
Oh, is it because okay, look, so like basically electrons are going for the oxygen, brother.
Right, they're going for the oxygen. The oxygen is kind of pulling the electrons through.
Okay, so it's like a circuit, brother. They like the oxygen
Yeah.
is the ground.
It-
Okay, I
it's
see what's
kind
going
of
on
a
now.
circuit, right? So if you don't have this oxygen, this you can't do any of it. If you don't have this oxygen,
You
in
can't
red,
push, you can't make the electrons go through this
you
thing like
can't make
that,
the electrons
basically.
go through. You can't do any of this stuff, right? So we're not gonna need we're not gonna need these NADHs
Brother.
to do anything here. Just a second. So we're not gonna need these NADHs to do anything here.
No.
So what we need, but remember,
No.
we're gonna need a little bit. We're gonna need a little bit of those NADs back in order to do some glycolysis. So you got to take the NADH and you got to turn them back into NAD plus somehow.
Oh,
So that's why this last step occurs, pyruvate to lactate, because you got to regenerate this NAD plus so that you can go back up here to the top and keep doing some glycolysis.
oh,
Mm.
Does that kind of make sense? Okay.
yeah.
So that's why pyruvate is being turned into lactate. Okay. So
Oh, alright.
now lactate doesn't do anything. This doesn't really produce much energy. There's other processes that this could be used for. But basically for energy, that's it. We're kind of done. Right? So here, right, you're just producing these two ATPs. That's it. So but this is, better than nothing, right? So that's why this happens.
Mhm.
Oh, I see. All right. So the cells know, brother. They know what they're doing.
Right. So all of this is like, you see how like, and this is just like, the surface, right? So you see how Allah has made this like so incredibly complex. We could study this forever, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. So again, so down here at the bottom, right? These are the two types of fermentation. At the bottom, we have this lactic acid fermentation. Okay. So in lactic acid fermentation, right, we produce lactate. Right. Now, in alcoholic fermentation, it's the same kind of idea. It's the same principle, except the pyruvate turns into this thing, which turns into ethanol. Okay.
Oh, I see.
So so basically in these organisms they have different kinds of enzymes and they make ethanol instead. But it's the same kind
So
of
we have
purpose.
alcohol fermentation. I
But
just too, brother.
but it's the same purpose. The NADH we want to turn back into NAD so that we can do a little bit more glycolysis. Right? So we can produce at
Okay.
least something, some ATP. Right? All right. So let's go to the last. I don't think there's anything on this one. Yeah. So this is just. I think we talked about all this, the burn and all that stuff. All right. So we talked about all this stuff.
Oh, that's why when you like go swimming and you swim too much, then your muscles start aching after that, right?
All right.
Because of the lactic acid buildup, brother.